take too many opportunities to re-record.
Well, this is a trial.
The musician in you or something, yeah. Like, take it again.
So, Annika, one thing I like about your work is I think you're not dogmatic, right? You're not sort of arguing that such and such theory is definitely the truth on consciousness. As I read you, you're exploring a variety of options in a spirit of free inquiry. However, some might think your inquiry is a little bit too free, because I've noticed you've expressed a little bit of sympathy for a slightly bizarre view. I had to look it up. Sorry.
I see where this is going.
I feel too self-conscious now.
He's prepared this very carefully, you see.
Yeah, now he's performing.
I feel now I've said it's a joke. I feel self-conscious about it. Anyway.
1.
I've noticed you expressing
40, 6 left, into 3 right long, opens 30, 3 right long tightens, into sudden, turn 2 left, 50, 2 right long tightens, into 3 left,
we should give it any time at all.
Yes, I actually
into 3 right,
answer, which I don't really
30,
think we should give it any time.
4 left long, tightens slow 30, 6 left tightens, turn 2 left.
So,
into 3 right long, tightens 30. 4 left of a crest, small cut maybe, 30. 3 right long, tightens 2, 30.
Seriously be asking the question, how far
3
down
left, 60.
and is it possible that we've been
Turn 5 right, extra long, opens flat of a crest, 80.
Systems. And that is actually something more basic to
Flank left of a jump, into small cut, 4 right long,
that I believe it is. As you say,
into 6 left of a crest long, tightens 3.
We truly don't know.
Into 2 right.
My strong intuition and assumption at this
Into 2 left long, tightens, into 5 right, tightens 4, extra long, tightens, into 4 left, and 3 left tightens.
Go back and forth using.
To keep right, into 6 left, and keep right into 5 left long,
Like the word. One
into
is,
4 left tightens,
does the opposite of what
30,
I'm trying to do, which is
4 right long, opens 30, 5 right long, tightens of a pump, into 4 left long, tightens narrow,
having a title that way, having an ism,
100,
I think gives
5 left of a bump, into unseen, 3 right long, opens 30.
I also think it just
Keep right, into slight left and narrow, 4 right,
me, and in my work,
into 6 left, and 3 left, double cut to a crest, turn 2 right long,
very controversial question.
opens of a crest, and keep left into 5 right small cut, 30,
Lost their careers over asking the wrong question.
4 left long, opens 40, keep right of a jump maybe into 5 left long, 50,
Wondering if there is consciousness in inanimate matter.
keep left into 5 right long, opens of a jump maybe,
So well received in the scientific.
into 6 left of a jump long,
Yeah, my goal is
into narrow, 6 right, into 5 left, extra long, opens, keep right of a big jump, to crest, into 6 left long, tightens, 70. Keep left, into 5 right, very long, 50. 6 left, extra long, tightens, 3. 30, 2 right long, tightens.
What it's like to be a human being is very rich and complex.
Into 4 left, opens, into open headed, right
What
long,
it's like to be a snail,
opens,
like to be a snail, much simpler still.
into 6 left, into 5 right, into 6 left long, tightens of a crest, into 5 right long, tightens, into unseen, 2 left, extra long,
Let's go with it.
opens,
surprise you with my answer.
into 4
Actually,
right,
you know what? I should
small
say
cut,
one more thing. Panpsychism, and you might be able to correct me.
into 4 left long, opens of a crest, into 6 right,
Since I wrote
70. Cut, 6 right, into 5 left long, of a crest, narrow, into 4 right, into 2 left tightens, into turn 3 right,
that consciousness goes all the way down.
50.
So
Flat
that
left of a jump, maybe narrow. 50. 6 left of a bump. Into cut. 6 right. Into 6 left long. Opens of a crest. 120.
I think my view actually does
6 left. Extra long.
align
Tightens of a jump. Into 4
Could be
right.
wrong.
Slow
But I think
30.
I've
Turn
kind of
cut 2 right.
Deeper
Opens.
into some version.
250.
That's interesting. I get this question so much. What's the
Right, middle of a narrow crest.
psychism and idealism?
Well, the
80.
belief I
Yeah.
have is that everything in the
4
universe,
left. Don't
what it
cut.
all
Slow
is,
50. Turn 1 right.
That's what the universe is. That's what everything we perceive is representing. There is
Opens.
nothing but experience.
70.
That's
6 right. Into 6 left
That's
long.
great. So what I'd like to do, I
150.
guess, is delve into that deeper by talking about why I take that view seriously. But I'd like to ask you first more about why you take that view seriously. So we've got something of a sense of what the view is now, that in some
Yeah.
sense all there is consciousness. Consciousness is at the foundation of reality. But for some people thinking, what on earth are you talking about? Where does this come from?
No, I know.
Or a
I
question
think
could ask
that myself, when I hear myself say it, I actually still am surprised, and it sounds crazy to me because it so goes against my scientific education and my intuitions and everything else. Go ahead,
So
sorry.
why should you even said then you would say you believe this view now, which I think is
If
slightly
I
more
wouldn't
confident
say I believe it. I would say
Okay.
if I had to go with let me say a couple ways I can say it. One, if I had to go with my best guess about the fundamental nature of reality, what quantum mechanics is telling us about the fundamental nature of reality, what neuroscience, everything kind of points in that direction.
Right.
That to me, that's the best guess as an answer to what the fundamental
3 left long.
is.
Opens of a crest.
There, yeah. So it is my best guess. But my best guess maybe if I had to put a percentage on it,
Into 3 right long. Tightens.
75%. Well, like that. That's how far. But I started at 50-50. Yeah. Yeah. I keep convincing myself more and more. The more I write,
Into
the
4
more I think
left.
about it, the more I'm convinced.
60.
That's really interesting. People are sometimes shocked, although I've spent my career defending
6
myself,
right.
I'd
Into
still
5
only
left. Tightens.
60% of something.
Into 3
But,
right. Tightens.
Can you tell us something a little bit more about
30.
why?
5 left long. Tightens 2.
Yeah. So really it comes down to
30.
the heart problem.
Turn
and
3 right. Tightens.
in
50.
thinking about the heart problem,
4 left.
I
Extra
don't
long.
see how
Tightens.
you avoid it
150.
unless you put consciousness all the way at the beginning.
Flat
And
left.
so if
Flat right of a crest
consciousness
long.
emerges at
30.
some point in nature, if it's
Flat
based on
left.
some processing or some configuration of matter,
Slow 6 left of a crest.
that may
30.
be
Turn
different.
1 left.
Just that if it is emergent,
120.
that is not something we can ever really understand, and we'll just be stuck with
6 right. Into unseen. 3 left long. Tightens.
at the heart of the fact that consciousness is emergent.
Into 5 right long.
And
Tightens.
so
3.
if there actually is a way
Into don't cut 2
solve
left. 30 over crest.
nature
Into
of
3
deep
right
reality,
long.
it's interesting
50.
to me that this actually is an answer that solves that. And so that's kind of one point
Into
of
don't cut
data in
6 left.
favor
30 over crest.
consciousness.
4 right long of a crest. 30.
That's really interesting.
5
So
left. Extra long of a crest.
that sounds
50.
quite similar to my own motivation.
Keep right of a
Maybe I
crest.
can just share with
140.
you how I think about this.
Slow.
and
5 left tightens.
maybe
Into
tell me
3
where
right
we
long.
agree, where we disagree. I guess the way I think about it is that there are just a couple
Into
of
don't cut.
options on
4 left.
consciousness on how it fits
Into
into
4 right
reality.
long.
Most
Tightens.
people go for
30.
physicalism, the view that the
5
story
left. And keep right
science,
into 6 left long.
fundamental story of reality,
50.
physics, chemistry, neuroscience, and then consciousness somehow emerges
6
from
right.
physical
Small
processes of the
cut.
brain. The
30.
way I think of psychism
6 left long.
is
Into
it
6
turns
right
that
of a
story
crest.
on its head.
Extra
So we
long.
see the primary thing is consciousness,
Just small
and
crest.
the
And 6
story
left
of
long.
physical
Tightens.
science
1
somehow
tightens.
emerges from some more fundamental
40.
story of
That's how I think of it. Yes.
Yeah, and crucially for me, and I always want to emphasize this, because people say, oh, what's the evidence?
3 right long.
I always want to emphasize
Into 5 left long. Tightens 2.
Equivalent, right?
Yes.
In the sense that you couldn't do an experiment to
Into 2
distinguish
right long.
for any scientific data.
Opens 6
Each
long.
of these theories just
Into 4
interprets
left.
those that data
Into
on their
slow
own
4
terms. So
right.
it's maybe a little
1
bit
left
like
long
quantum
tightens.
mechanics, where you have all these different
50.
interpretations, the Copenhagen, many worlds, Bohm, and so on. And each of these
Flank
theories
crest,
just have their own
50.
stories.
Keep left over crest 30.
How they
Unseen.
explain
1
the
right
data,
long.
so it's hard to see how to distinguish them experimentally. So I don't think we can tell which
Into
is right
5 left over crest.
which kind of frustrates
I
people.
think we kind of
Into
just have
3 right
starting
long,
assumptions. I don't
80.
think there's evidence for either, and we just have to make one. I mean, we made one starting assumption, which is that it's all physical and consciousness comes in at some point. And I think that science should keep going, obviously. And I've said many times before that I think that was the
1
right
left long.
assumption to begin with. But it
30.
really is just an assumption, and I would say there is no evidence.
Crest and 6 right.
that it's
50. 5 left long. Into unseen. 1 right tightens.
But of course, there's. I could disagree with myself on that note.
Opens long. 50.
Sorry against that, but I think when it comes down to it, really
1 left.
closely at it,
Tightens over
what
crest.
we're counting as evidence is
30.
really just assumptions.
Turn
based on our
unseen.
own
2 right.
The other thing I was going to say is that
Opens.
physicalism,
100.
I always find that interesting because
Crest.
one of my
3 right
primary
long.
interests has always been fundamental physics and what this universe
Into 3 left
is,
long.
what it's made
Tightens
of.
1 long.
And so
Tightens
I've been
small
reading
cut.
about quantum mechanics actually since I was a teenager, because,
Into 1
because
right.
of this deep
30.
desire to
4
just
left
understand,
long.
once
Opens
you
over
get
crest.
down
40.
there, once you dig and dig and dig, what is the stuff of
5
the universe?
left.
How is-
And
what
3
is-
right over crest.
why-
Over finish.
How did this all come into being? And so quantum mechanics is telling us a very strange story about physicalism, right? I mean, it barely fits the category of physicalism in the way we typically think of physicalism. And so we kind of lose what I think we traditionally think of physicalism when we go to the fundamentals anyway. It's almost like all bets are off at that point.
Yeah, well, I haven't told Keith this. I've actually been contemplating recently a panpsychist interpretation of quantum mechanics, which, well, maybe let's not go down the rabbit hole of quantum mechanics just yet.
Start.
But,
Flat crest 30.
So
crest
as you
and
say,
don't
we've got
cut.
these
3
two
right long
explanatory
tightens.
projects.
Into 3 left over
Both
crest
start
long
with their own
tightens.
assumptions.
Good luck.
We can't distinguish them with an experiment, but what you can do, I think, and I'd like to see if
5,
you agree on this, what we
4,
can do is
3, 2,
evaluate them on their
1,
own terms,
go.
see how well
Flat
they
crest
are
30.
doing.
Crest and don't cut. 3 right long
So the
tightens.
physicalist is
Into 3
supposed to
left over crest long
solve the hard
tightens.
problem, explain how
30.
consciousness emerges from physical
3
processes
right
in the brain.
long. Tightens over
Say,
crest
"Oh, is that
30.
going?" The panpsychist is supposed
Don't cut.
to do it
Open
the other way
left.
around, start with consciousness,
Opens.
account for the emergence of physical
To keep
reality
middle of a crest.
from some underlying
6
story about
left.
consciousness.
Into 2
So we
right
can ask
long.
how well
Tightens
has this
don't
project
cut.
gone? And I think
Opens.
when you do that,
Into cut.
the
5 left.
panpsychist story just looks like it's in better shape. Like we've been
Yes.
wrestling with the hard problem of consciousness for decades.
Yes.
I would argue it's got nowhere. I mean, that's different to the science of consciousness. The science of consciousness has
Yes.
made progress, but
Agreed.
solving the hard problem is not going. And I think there are good philosophical arguments that seem to show it's actually not a coherent project.
Exactly.
Whereas when it comes to the panpsychist project, I kind of think all the mysteries have been solved there, and this comes back to the
I don't know if
important
I would say
work
all
of-
the mysteries have been solved, but maybe the hard problem certainly.
yeah. Well, we're not just the hard problem. So
Yeah.
in a way, you might think the hard problem doesn't arise for the panpsychists because they're starting with consciousness rather
No,
than.
it doesn't.
But-
There is no
but-
problem to begin with.
But there's the mirror image of how do you account for physical reality on the basis of
Yes.
of
That I think is
consciousness.
not a very hard project, actually.
So what do you think of that?
It's
how
not
do we-
as
how
hard
do
a
we-
project.
How do we close that explanatory gap? How do we solve the panpsychist's mirror image of the hard problem? How do we explain physical reality in terms of consciousness? You say that's not a very hard problem. I think people might think, hey, Really? That seems pretty hard to me.
Compared to the hard problem.
Right.
But I'm realizing I'm want to take this opportunity to get more clear because you keep using the word panpsychism, which I never use, and I don't think about it that way. I'm curious, even if we're talking about the same sort of view. And so one question I have about panpsychism is the general view that there is the material world and consciousness is one property? Or, I mean, I guess this is the question you say you get asked a lot. Could panpsychism be, or a version of panpsychism be, more or less a version of idealism? Could it? Yeah, I don't know how else to ask that question. Yeah,
that's a good way to ask it.
Because I see my view as going one step further than panpsychism.
So the panpsychism. So my big inspiration here is Bertrand Russell, his important work in the 1920s. I think we should think of Russell as the Darwin of consciousness. I think he solved all the mysteries. And his essential insight, and Arthur Eddington, following him, did some work in this area as well. He was the first scientist to experimentally confirm Einstein's general theory of relativity. Anyway, their essential insight was, look, physics is just a load of mathematical structure, right? Physics is just a bunch of equations. In a sense, physics doesn't care what's going on at the fundamental level of reality, as long as it has the right mathematical structure.
Sure.
As whatever is down there, as long as it have the right mathematical structure, you've got physics.
Yeah.
This is Stephen.
Well, the question is just, what is it a structure of?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Stephen Hawking famously said, physics doesn't tell us what breathes fire into the equations. So the panpsychist postulates, and as you say, you could think of this as a form of idealism.
Okay.
That at the fundamental level of reality, there are just networks of very simple conscious entities interacting in simple, predictable ways. Through their interactions, they make certain patterns, certain mathematical structures, and those mathematical structures just are what we call physics. So you get physics out of the line facts about consciousness.
I see mathematics. Sorry, go ahead.
So, I mean, just on the idealism point, I mean, it depends what you mean by idealism. If by idealism one simply means all there is at the fundamental level is consciousness stuff, mind stuff, then I think this could be a form of idealism.
Okay, so we're even closer than
So that's one way of seeing the in my view, why this panpsychist view, or whatever you want to call it, looks in better shape, because we don't know how to get consciousness out of physical stuff, but I think we do know how to get physics out of consciousness. I think Bertrand Russell showed us how to do that. So
and I think it's not hard to say or to imagine that physics and the mathematics describe the structure of consciousness. And the one mystery I find that I'm left with, I'm kind of skipping to the end, but the one mystery I find I'm left with at the end of all of this is, why does consciousness have the structure that it does? And that may just be the last unsolved mystery. But that's something I think a lot about now. But you brought up entities, which I just wanted to insert something there, which I actually think that the idea of entities comes out of an illusion and makes thinking about this much more difficult. And so part of why I think I see this as a less difficult problem than many philosophers is that I don't think there are subjects or selves or entities. I can grant that there is something we could call those things, but I think the way we intuit them is wrong, and they give us these false intuitions about the structure of the universe. And so if all the universe is consciousness that has a structure, experiences arise in the universe, qualia arises in the universe, and there's no subject they're arising to, and there are no entities they're arising to. There can be qualia that get, because of the structure of consciousness, get linked across time through memory. And so there's a way in which one qualia at one moment in the future has a connection and relationship to the qualia in the past, but they're all arising in and of themselves. And so there's a sense in which if there's a qualia that is incorporated or related to a qualia that arose in the past, there's this illusion that there's an I that was in the past and experienced that qualia then I experienced that one, and then I experienced that one, and now I'm here, rather than them simply just being, I often use the analogy of a pot of boiling water, where water, it's not a perfect analogy, but water is consciousness, and the bubbles are the content, the form, the structure that it has. And so all that is actually happening is felt experience arising in maybe infinite forms. And it is the structures that connect qualia across time, and I guess in some cases across time and space, that give us this illusion of entities, of selves, of subjects. So I think without them, it's actually much easier to draw a picture of how the universe exists as consciousness that has a structure with felt experiences that, because it's it's all one thing, it's all consciousness, it's all awareness, and because there's a form to it, there's a structure to it, every part of, we think of things in space-time terms because we're humans, and I don't quite know how to describe it outside of that, but the science is pointing us in a direction of there being no space and time, and so ultimately I think of this outside of space and time, but I have to kind of describe it this way because I'm a human being and I don't know how else to describe it, but so there's a point in space-time of qualia that is related essentially to every other point. And so it's this interaction between qualia and how they influence and affect each other that causes the content to take place in the way it does, and then causes us to believe, as these beings, what we feel are entities, that is this qualia that is strung across time through memory, and then we have this illusion of being a self. We look out at the world as other, right? There's me in here, and then there's the world out there, and everything that I perceive in the world, under my view, would be my hypothetical view that I don't totally believe. I should give the disclaimer. Is representations of other conscious experiences arising in the universe, both of which are affecting each other. So, the conscious experience that is arising here, I see my computer in front of me, that represents many different consciousness, many bubbles of experience content arising, and how that's relating to these, is appearing for me, whatever. Oh shoot, I don't know how to finish the sentence, but however it's appearing for me gives me the impression that there is a thing out there that is made of matter that is not conscious. I'm very limited in how I can communicate with my computer. It's like for whatever the reason is that the structure of consciousness is the way it is, the set of experiences at where my computer sits has a very limited ability to communicate with me or to share the types of experiences or to know them. So it's different when I'm talking to another human being. If I'm talking to Philip, we're similar enough systems that there's an ability to kind of share and see and understand intuitively that there's a conscious experience happening there. And I think the further we are away, there's a very interesting scientist, Sarah Walker, who describes this. She's not talking about consciousness, she's talking about life, but we've now had many conversations about this where she thinks her theory might actually apply to consciousness and we might be talking about the same thing. But she works on something called assembly theory, and she talks about life being structures through time, and we only see them one slice at a time, but that they're actually structures in time, and that really maps on very well to the way I see things if I'm explaining them well at all right now. I have no idea. But I'm writing an article about this that will come out in a couple of months.
Oh, it's absolutely fascinating. I've just got back from a conference in the US with Sarah Walker, actually. And,
Oh, how wonderful.
we were going over these things.
Oh, I love
organised by Paul Davies, the physicist Paul Davies. Gets a lot
Right. Oh, I was
together.
invited and I couldn't go.
All right.
Shame. I'm especially disappointed now knowing that you were there. Okay.
But
another time.
yeah, but here we might start to get a little bit of disagreement. I'm not sure. I was worried we were agreeing too much. I mean, it doesn't matter if we don't disagree, because we'll bring Keith in a moment and we'll definitely get some agreement there. But so this is, I mean, this links, I think, to one of your interesting contributions to these discussions, Annika, your proposed solution to what is generally seen as the biggest problem for panpsychism, the so-called combination problem, which there's a lot of ways of making more precise, but the basic idea is how do little conscious things come together to make the big conscious thing that is the human or the animal brain, you know. And it's all very well postulating, okay, consciousness goes all the way down to the fundamental level, but how do those very rudimentary conscious things come together to make our consciousness? And you wrote an article for the book Is Consciousness Everywhere, which was a collection of essays responding to my work. And your solution to this, which very much links to what you just said, is to deny the existence of selves or subjects. And if there is just a consciousness and forms of consciousness, and rather than these self-like receptacles of consciousness, then maybe this problem just goes away. But let me just...
I wouldn't say I deny the phenomenon of a self, and I can be a little clear about that if you want me to. What my point is that it's an illusion in terms of the information we think that phenomenon is giving us about the underlying reality.
So that's really interesting. So tell me if you agree with this. And I think this will... Tell me if you agree with this. It seems to me when I attend to my conscious experience, at a given moment, I'm not talking about across time, at a given moment, that there's a deep unity among my experiences. I'm experiencing lots of different things, colours, sounds, smells, taste, but these don't seem to come in sort of isolated packets. Rather, they come as aspects of a single unified experience. Now, I would assume that you also enjoy this deep unity to your consciousness, that your experiences are
I see
unified.
I see it differently, and you go ahead.
So just finish the point. So I would assume that your experiences are also come in this unified package, but if we consider your experiences and mine together, they don't form a sort of unified set. So crucially, I'm not talking about a self across time, but it seems to me that my experiences considered in isolation and your experiences considered in isolation and Keith's experiences all enjoy this deep unity. So isn't that still, if that's right, and I think maybe you're about to disagree, but if that's right, then we surely need, there's a sort of challenge there to explain how conscious experiences come to be unified in this way.
So, many things to say about this. First of all, I don't totally agree with the observation that we are experiencing all of these things at one time. And this has become clear to many, many meditators. I did an interview with Joseph Goldstein, a meditation teacher, for my series to talk about this very subject, because I don't have the experience that he has, but the feeling I was getting after sitting a long meditation retreat, the experience I was having, it felt like a realization And this is something you can have many types of insights and realizations when you meditate for a long time, because you are you're gaining this skill and this level of concentration, paying better attention to your moment-to-moment experience than you ever would in your normal life, or that any human would be led to. It's something that's not natural for us. It's something that we can only do, and so it's almost like, neurologically we have a blind spot. It's almost like if you paid close attention, you could actually see it. There are lots of things like that, where when you pay close attention, you realize, oh, I can see how I'm confused most of the time about the way I'm perceiving things. And time is very interesting in consciousness as it relates to time, because the present moment is actually almost impossible to define, right? It goes by so quickly when you're sitting in meditation and all you're doing is being with what is, and you're not following thoughts into the future, to the past. You're simply being with the sound, the sight, the body sensation of the breath. And this is hours and hours, days and days of doing this. You gain a kind of skill that most people don't have. And one of the realizations you have while doing that is, and I learned this from having it myself and then talking to people like Joseph Goldstein and others. It seemed to me that we experience one qualia at a time, and I am not seeing what's in front of me and hearing the bird chirp at the same time. That there's a flickering that happens. So it's almost like a film, right? That they're actually all still images, but when you play them quickly enough, you have this illusion that it's all in one moment. But when you can pay close enough attention, and first of all, you get down to what the actual present moment is, and it's very mysterious, because it's very hard to know. Like time can, in a sense, disappear. Our typical sense of time can disappear, because there is no way to say, okay, it's now. Like our brains just can't actually get to the present moment, because it moves so quickly to the next one. Anyway, so it's a very interesting exercise. I highly, highly recommend it. I'm really gonna push hard for when your kids are a little older. I'm gonna push hard for you to set a 10-day meditation retreat. But so I think we are mistaken about the extent to which all of the different qualia are included in one moment. What I think is really happening is one qualia, one little bubble at a time is popping in the universe. And again, based on the structure, some of these qualia get connected through time. And so imagine a split brain patient, right? You could be a split brain patient where it's conceivable, there's some controversy around this, but I think we could all agree that it's conceivable. There's a part of your brain that has been completely disconnected from the rest of your brain, and it's hearing what I'm saying, and it's going, Annika's right, and you're completely unaware of it. I mean, it'd be like being what is it called? Conjoined twin, where there are actually two brains. That's actually something it's not even controversial. There are two brains in a body. There's one brain is having its experience, the other one isn't. But this could be happening in your own brain right now, where there are many conscious experiences arising and passing away that are not entering this stream of memory, and there would be no way for you or I or anyone to really ever know that. And so, I mean, I think this is even true of panpsychism, right? Or I don't know, I guess it depends on your view, but the way I see it, there are countless conscious experiences arising all the time in the system that is your body. I mean, many in your brain and throughout your body, and they're arising and passing away, and they're just not part of this thread that you're containing in your memory. I think of it almost as, I'm just thinking, I've come up with other examples, but the one that's coming to me now is someone who's, I guess it could be a trauma situation. If anyone has had an experience of feeling extremely unlike themselves, I was thinking of LSD. I mean, you can take a psychedelic drug that causes you to even forget that you're a human being. Like, your experience is so different from your normal human experience that there's no sense of being an I, or having a name, or being able to speak, or any of that. But, I've had those experiences. I'm now here. I remember those experiences. Was that not me? I mean, it's interesting to talk about. There's this kind kind of like intellectual trick that we think, or we like to think about what it would be like to be someone else. Or I do this with my cats all the time. I think I wish I could just be my cat for 30 seconds. I just want to know what that perspective is like. I want to know what it's like to be my cat. And the truth is that question doesn't make any sense. But the way I could have that experience is if there were, and there may be some future technology that makes this possible. If there was some way to get whatever the neurons are doing in the cat's brain in that moment, if there were some way to implant that an experience of 5 minutes of my cat into my stream of memory, I would have a memory of being the cat in the same way that I have a memory of being on acid that was totally unlike any experience I've ever had. Right? It's just in my memory. And it's in your, and it's, there's the long-term memory, but there's also memory in every moment. I mean, it's just, if I didn't remember the last 5 seconds, this would be a very different situation. And it doesn't mean there's no self that would disappear. There just would no longer be that structure of memories connected over time, qualia, and having access to it. But there could be all kinds of qualia arising in your brain right now that are there, that are not part of you, that you don't count as you because you don't remember them, or that were, yeah. I mean, I would say you don't remember them.
That's fascinating. So we should bring Keith in, but so I suppose just by, I mean, I do admit that, yeah, if it is the case that the simplest experiences never unify into complex bundles that at a time, it's just memory that's bundling them together across time. I think that does completely remove the combination problem. I suppose I find it difficult to believe, but that might be because I haven't meditated enough. But anyway, Keith has been waiting very patiently, listening to these two wild.
I'm gonna get my pen out. I'm getting ready for the arguments.
Oh God! Why? Tell us why this is BS.
Well, maybe my right hemisphere here is nodding agreement with all of this. But my left one wants to articulate a little worry. I can completely see how I think I understand how panpsychism can seem plausible. In fact, I think that given a certain starting point, thinking about consciousness, it's a natural way to go. I've actually got a paper in which I argue that if you start with a certain way of conceptualizing consciousness, essentially something irreducibly subjective, something that no account of structures and processes and mechanisms, whatever in the brain, sensory mechanisms, reactive mechanisms, all this stuff. If you have the idea that it's something distinct from that, it's something that whereas though they are public, there is this inner life that's essentially subjective, that is only accessible from the first person perspective. If you conceptualize consciousness, then yes, you definitely have a hard problem, because how do you make this transition from a description of some public structure to the inner life of the thing? How do you get a new world, as it were, to open up inside a physical structure? If that's what it needs for consciousness, a new world to open up, irreducibly subjective aspect of coming to existence, then absolutely you have a hard problem. Absolutely.
Can I ask you a question there? Can I ask you a question just so I can understand?
Sure.
Let me think of an example. If you imagine there's a AI robot dog that someone just created, right? And we don't know if it's conscious or not. It might be. I don't know where this is coming from. But so there are two possible realities. There's this dog that barks and whines, and but we know it's human made and doesn't have a brain. Seems like a dog, and there's one circumstance where it is having a felt experience. There is a felt experience entailed in that processing. And there's the other, which is more in line with our intuitions, which is it's still just a computer. It doesn't have any experience, right? My question is, what is the difference between those two realities for you? And what would you call it?
Well,
What is
I
the thing
wouldn't-
that's missing in the robot that does not have felt experience?
I wouldn't conceptualize it as the presence or absence of something irreducibly subjective. As, is there an irreducibly subjective aspect to this creature's existence that we can never know about from the outside? I wouldn't conceptualize consciousness in that way.
No,
think
I
what-
wouldn't either, actually. Yeah.
And then, so there isn't, the question is, we need to work out, well, I'm not denying consciousness. I mean, I'm conscious right now, I have conscious experiences. The question is, what's happening when you have a conscious experience? Let's say pain.
Yeah.
Pain's absolutely real.
But
Something's
also,
happening when
what is the difference between a physical system that has it and one that doesn't?
Well, it depends what it is that that you're asking about. What is
Yeah.
this thing that whose presence or absence we're unsure about? If
Okay,
it's something
let you finish, yeah.
irreducibly subjective, then no science will never tell you whether it's present, because science is a public third-person enterprise. It will never penetrate into an irreducibly subjective. But and I grant you that when we introspect, it seems to us like there is this essentially private, irreducibly subjective world. But what if that is a sort of illusion created by processes of introspective monitoring? You see,
Yeah.
I don't think
I
we
think-
have
yeah.
that kind of. I think we're evolved biological organisms, so all our knowledge is the product of some sort of, if you like, sensory systems, including interoceptive systems, introspective systems, and these are not guaranteed to be reliable. They're not guaranteed to be free
Absolutely.
from distortion.
I
And this goes for our knowledge of our own minds too. So our introspective systems are saying to us, look, there's this irreducibly subjective world in here that it's just, you just can't get a grip on in terms of function or any sort of physical process. That's what our
Yeah.
introspective is, but maybe.
Well, I guess I
Maybe
wonder
it is.
what it is you do, what you would call that, and what you see the difference between that existing or not existing. Because
Well-
I think we might actually completely agree. I'm not sure, but what I do agree with you about is that every experience can be said to be an illusion in the sense that it's giving us a false picture of the underlying reality. When they're kind of causing us to feel as if we have this perfect window onto it. So it's this very strong illusion.
Including
But I
perfect
don't-
window on our own minds.
Yes, of course. But I don't think you can say that the experience, that consciousness itself is an illusion. You can't say those felt experiences don't exist in the universe, which I don't think you are saying. So the experiences themselves clearly exist. The felt experience is something that exists in the universe, exactly as it is in the moment it's being experienced, right? And so,
It exists, but I don't
exists.
necessarily know what it is.
of course,
I need science to tell me what it is.
Yes, I
can't
agree.
say- So I can't infer from that. Look, science
But it
can't.
is. But if you say it's something that arises at a certain, if it's not everywhere, if it doesn't exist in everything, then that has to come up at some point in processing, and then you end up with this kind of dualism that I just can't subscribe to, and that's where I get stuck, because if it exists, if those conscious experiences that we agree exist in the universe, even though they're illusions in the sense that they're not giving us correct information about the world, they just are the experiences. The world could be anything, but we know the experiences. I can say this, gripping my pen, right? The feeling, the sensation here. That happened in the universe, right? That experience exists in the universe of my pen. Whatever the situation actually turns out to be, whatever the physical laws and structure and whatever it all turns out to be, the experience that I am having of gripping this pencil, that is an experience that is now in the past that existed in the universe. So the question is, if that type of thing is possible in the universe, why is it that it's not associated with everything? And if it arises at some point, you're talking about dualism, because it's no longer something that can be described from the outside. And I don't think it's being experienced by itself or by an entity. I just think it arises in and of itself. And in and of itself, it doesn't have something that is available anywhere but from in and of itself. And if there are systems that have it and other systems that don't, you're kind of committing yourself to this dualism where it's kind of it's strange, but I think it becomes a more new age view, which is how I talked myself out of it. Is it seemed like, okay, then I'm actually committing to a magical thing that doesn't exist in the universe, but then it magically shows up.
I think from my perspective, you're still got the starting point you're still taking the starting point that I want to resist taking, which is that we know what the experience is in and of itself, that we have some sort of direct, immediate
We don't know
revelation.
anything. We don't know anything except that it exists.
What exists?
The feeling.
What do you mean by the feeling? Is there something? Do you know what the feeling is?
Yeah.
Could the feeling just be literally nothing more than a pattern of activity in a certain region of your brain? Could it just be
Absolutely.
that?
And I think that is what it is, but it all has to be part of the same thing. Otherwise, you're stuck in a magical dualism.
So you could be wrong about.
It's just we don't know the felt sensation of everything else that is processed.
But I don't have infallible access to what's happening in my brain.
Sure.
So if it is just if there's just a certain pattern of brain activity there, my introspective mechanisms might mislead me as to whether or not it's there. The experience might be there, but my introspective mechanisms might not pick up on it.
I'm saying we can't know anything about the physical world, but we can know about experiences that arise.
But if the experience just is a pattern of brain activity, then it is part of the physical world. So we can.
Yes.
So how can we know
that's how I've come to my view, is the physical world and the experiences are all part of the same thing.
Yeah, I'm guessing. So do you think
So
then
it is a brand new, unlike any other thing. If nothing has it, but then you get a brain, and then suddenly we're not just sitting with physical processes, but we're sitting with felt experiences arising in the universe, you've entered some sort of magical dualism that doesn't seem right.
But then if it just is a pattern of brain activity, there's no mystery about how there's no hard.
There is, because there's activity in this paper right now, and I mean the universe is nothing but activity, and so why we think that type of thing that doesn't exist anywhere else, there's no reason for it to come into being. I think the evolution argument is flawed. If we can't, I mean, you have to then come up with a reason for why you're talking about it as an additional property that comes into being. Why would that be? And so then, most scientists will have this evolutionary argument. Well, feeling something changes the behavior. It's causal, and so if we feel it, then we act differently. We're able to do all these other things. But the truth is, we don't really have any evidence for that. We could build an AI that can do everything a human can do, but may have no felt experiences associated. There's no good reason.
If the felt experience just is a pattern of brain activity, if that's all it is, there's nothing more to it, then if we told an evolutionary story about how that pattern of brain activity evolved, that kind
you have to say why there's this additional element beyond.
It's that additional element then it is more than just.
But it is an additional element, because you're saying you could see two dog robots. One has an internal experience, one doesn't. Those are two different states of the universe. You're talking about another thing. You are pointing to you are talking about consciousness. You are pointing to the felt experience as being in addition to the physical system. It's not
but
just.
That's what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that's an illusion generated by our processes of introspective self-monitoring. We monitor states of our brains.
The only thing we know is that felt experience exists.
That epistemic foundationalism I'm definitely not on board with. No, I don't think evolution has equipped us with that sort of epistemic foundational. I mean, where would these? How would we develop mechanisms for generating infallible knowledge, getting us that sort of about ourselves? It seems our knowledge of ourselves, of our own minds, our own experiences.
I'm saying everything we understand is compatible with being brains in a vat. Is compatible with being simulation in somebody else's computer is like, we can't have firsthand understanding of anything. The one thing that I can know in the pure sense of the term is that I'm feeling something. I mean, I could be wrong about everything else, and I might never know. I don't think I will ever know how that experience comes into being. I believe in evolution. I believe that evolution is a process and it's part of the structure of consciousness, but I think I'm actually really in line with Donald Hoffman's work here. I really believe evolution has led us to have a completely false view of what the ultimate nature of it is.
How is it led us, evolution, the same evolutionary process, led us to have a completely infallible view of our own experience?
I wouldn't call it infallible. It just is what it is. That's the definition of it, is the experience itself. There's nothing more. There's no analyzing to do. There's no, I mean, you could be, I could be sitting yeah.
Any claim we make about it is a knowledge claim. If we say
well,
that,
to communicate to you, I have to make a claim about it. But when I'm not, if I'm just sitting in meditation and I'm feeling the air go in at my nose and not even having the concept of nose, it's just that there's a feeling of, you know, I have to describe it in some way to you, but even without the words. But what I'm, you know, you can picture this yourself. If you're sitting and you're feeling the air go in your nostrils and you're feeling your chest rise without any of these concepts, right? It's just feeling. That's all there is. There's actually nothing else. This
is a sort of, I guess, a sort of Cartesian perspective where
anything else we want to know is an interpretation of something. It's not a direct no.
I think everything's an interpretation, including our claims that we make about our own minds, our own experience. I think those are interpretation too. I agree with Donald that evolution has provides us with the kinds of knowledge we need to survive and so on. And I think exactly the same goes for our knowledge about our own minds, our own experiences. The things we say about our own experience, about what it's like to be us, is itself the product of evolved evolutionary mechanisms, and is likely to be a selective and distorting, and it's certainly not likely to be a reliable guide to the deep nature of fundamental reality. Why would evolution have equipped us with an insight into the fundamental nature of reality, of what quarks are made of? Evolution's got no interest in telling us what quarks are made of.
I agree.
So
but you're still wanting to smuggle in another property that doesn't exist in many places of the universe, but exists where there are brains, and it's.
No, I'm not. I'm wanting to smuggle in brains alone and nothing. Brains doing their brainy stuff.
Right. So why would you assume? Why would you assume that brains do this and pennies don't?
Because brains have all kinds of sensitivities that amount to what we call consciousness.
Right, but we have zero evidence. So we can only know that conscious experiences exist where they can communicate their experiences to us.
I don't think so. We just look for similarities and patterns of sensitivity and reactivity, which is what consciousness is. We
don't know that that's what consciousness is, though.
No, that's the hypothesis that I'm proposing, that there's another perspective on this, that you don't have to start with a conception of consciousness that gives rise to a hard problem.
I think when you look at where our assumptions are about what consciousness is and how it arises in brains, you find that we're really basing our assumptions on a lot of false intuitions we have based on the fact that we have human brains and we've been given these false intuitions.
I would be inclined to agree with that. Yes, I would definitely. I think that it's present.
And so our idea that consciousness is complex and only arises in brains comes out of these silly human intuitions. I mean, you know, and I do think there's kind of a revolution probably coming where it's similar to a lot of the other scientific revolutions where we're no longer the center of the universe, where you know it's not, and that consciousness is, and I think consciousness is special. I was about to say it's not special, but I don't think it's special in the sense that only human beings have it. We've just assumed that because we can only talk to each other. You know, gravity is very special, but not only human beings have gravity. You know, this assumption we've made that consciousness is a very complex thing, that only human beings and these kind of higher order creatures and this false hierarchy We have no evidence for that. It could be the most basic thing in the world. It could just be everywhere. And we don't have every reason we try to give for it being causal at the behavioral level doesn't work. I mean, there are lots of all the behaviors. We can explain all the behaviors without it. And so
I don't think you can. I don't think you can explain pain behavior without mentioning pain. I think it's. I think pain is.
You don't think we're going to create robots that exhibit?
I think that's why pain evolved, or pain mechanisms evolved.
Okay, so good. Okay,
to teach us to survive, to keep us away from things that are dangerous.
So you don't think a system could learn to survive without pain?
I think that if it learned, if it had the pain mechanism, the kind of pain sensitivities and the pain reactive dispositions that we have, it would have pain. I think that's what pain is, a complex set of sensitivities and reactive dispositions.
So you're convinced that if we build an AI that is sufficiently human-like, that expresses pain and does work, basically on the outside, you can't tell the difference. Behaviorally, this AI robot...
Not on the outside, no, but I mean, it would have to replicate...
you don't think it could take care of itself as well? Or it would, the moment it started taking care of itself as well as we take care of ourselves, you would say that is conscious? It couldn't...
No, it would have to be doing it in much the same way that we're doing it, with the same kind of patterns of sensitivities.
But that's why that makes no sense. That's just because well, you're saying that's the way I do it, so that's the way it has to be done. But it's
I think it could be
just an assumption. Because you just said pain is useful in that it gives us these certain behaviors of avoiding things, and we couldn't do it without it. But then I give you an example of a system that could avoid things and take care of itself just fine, maybe even better than we can without it.
I didn't say that pain was just the overt behavior. I said pain is a cluster of psychological sense.
Right, but it has to affect behavior for it to be evolutionarily advantageous.
Nothing one was selected for if it wasn't. It didn't have to.
Right, but I'm saying, I don't think there's a clear advantage. I think we can create robots that take just as good care of themselves as we do, and who run away from danger, and who do all the things they need to do, maybe even do it better than we do, and they don't have to feel pain.
Well, you could probably do it in different ways. Certainly, I'm not saying.
So why did it have to?
But because it took the way that
you're adding an additional piece of it feeling. You're saying that the behavior that causes us to avoid, the evolutionary behavior that causes us to avoid getting harmed, has to have a felt sensation in order for it to be as effective.
No, I'm not saying that. No, at all. I'm saying that pain is a complex cluster of sensitivity.
But you're saying it's necessary for something.
I'm saying that pain. When we talk about pain, if you ask. And when I take a case when I'm in pain, what's happening there? Look at what's happening there. Study it, study it at the neuroscientific level.
Sure.
So that's what pain is. It's that state that I'm in then.
I agree. It's completely, it is the same thing as the physical thing we observe. But
it's not something extra, private, in addition to all that. It just is.
I think you're claiming that there is something extra without
I'm not. That's what I think is an illusion.
Then what is needed? If there are systems that could do all of this without pain, then
I'm not saying there could be systems that could display the overt behavior of pain without having that complex of sensitivities. But if they replicated those to a sufficiently fine-grained detail, then there'd be pain. Because that's what pain is. I mean, there's going to be a complex gradation here on multiple dimensions.
But there's something about the feeling it that you think is necessary for that processing. That processing has to entail the feeling.
It's this idea of conceptualizing it from the first-person way as an essence of feeling that I'm resisting. I'm saying that is our way of talking about a complex physical process. What's happening is just the physical process. This talk about the essence of the feeling, the what it's likeness, is our way of conceptualizing that. But that's just our human way of talking about it. It's not an insight into the fundamental nature of the thing.
Okay, but does everything have that then? Does every processing in the world have that element?
No, only things that are similar and some relatively similar in some dimensions to what we have.
There's no good reason for why that would be.
Why not?
Why some would have felt experience and others wouldn't?
Because some would have these relevantly similar clusters of sensitivities and reactive dispositions, and some wouldn't. It's not. You could go right down the scale to animals to have very minimal forms of it, but once you have no sensitivity to the outside world, no disposition to react to it, then there's nothing at all similar to pain.
Right, but nothing has no sensitivity to the outside world. I mean, there really is no outside world at the heart of it. It's all just one world moving in.
Well, it just shades off. I mean, well, you get down to the level of, you're not going to get it below the level of an organism that has interest in a boundary or something, and in a sort of, boundary between itself and the rest of the world. Once you get past that, you're not going to have anything. But from there, you build it gradually.
I mean, there's
but I just don't see why evolution would have equipped us with an insight into fundamental reality. Why would it have done that?
Yeah, I don't see why evolution would have equipped us with conscious
But insight. Well, so maybe it didn't.
Right.
Maybe it equipped us with something else that we misconceptualize as this essence of feeling.
I think feeling is the least conceptualized thing there is, and we just have no way of talking about it without concepts. Because, and I think this may change in the future, actually, by the way. I think there may be ways to share qualia between systems that will really help us make progress here. The only method we have for that now is language, and language is really limited.
I'm
so limited in how we can have these conversations.
But neuroscience is going to help it. The way that, say, Paul Churchill expressed, I think there was a lot of. Anyway, I'm not saying that this must be correct. I just want to try and put another option on the table to question the. I think we can question that starting point. The question is really, suppose.
So what is your starting point? Yeah, your starting point is.
My starting point is that we have. I have these states, okay, which I call it to be a conscious experience. Okay? I have pains. I see colours and things and so on, and I have these things. Something's happening. Okay, I don't know what it is really. I'm tempted to say all sorts of things about it, like it's kind of mysterious, but I know for sure what it is because it's the only thing that's immediately presented to me somehow, to myself, that I'm more sure of it than of anything else in the world. That it's only I know what it's really like, that it presents a hard problem, and so on, so on, so on, so on. Those are things I'm inclined to say about my experience. And what I'm suggesting is maybe those things are a distortion of what is really happening. And I'm inclined to say them because of introspective mechanisms of introspective monitoring and modelling that present essentially my brain activity to me in a certain way, courtesy of evolved mechanisms, that lead me then to make all these philosophical claims about the nature of my experience, and to take those claims as certain foundations for theorizing about the nature of reality and doing metaphysics. And saying maybe we should try and unpack mechanisms, introspective mechanisms, that lead me to say those things. And if we do, maybe our sense that there's a hard problem at all will dissipate. And we'll say, well, no, actually, it's just the way we self-monitor.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that, except for the fact that I don't see any reason for there to be a felt experience associated with any processing in the universe at all. And I think it makes more sense that it's associated with all processing than just some processing.
But it's the felt experience bit, that concept, that I'm suggesting might be a product of this mechanism, that is illusory, this notion of immediately felt.
I mean, it's illusory in what it tells us about the world. I don't think you can say it's illusory in the sense that it doesn't exist. I don't think you can deny that it exists, and I don't think you do. And so I think it's confusing to call it an illusion because it's when you get down to consciousness itself, you can say every experience we have is an illusion in the sense that it gives us false information about the underlying reality. But to say the feeling is an illusion makes people think you're saying it doesn't. You're deluded about the fact that it happened at all, that there's an experience present.
Well, something happened. I mean, but what might have happened may have had no essentially first person.
No, I'm just talking about the experience itself.
Well, I'm talking about the experience too, but I'm saying the experience may just be nothing more than a pattern.
But that's another level to it. Then, I mean, all we have access to is the experience itself.
That's what I'm denying.
Okay.
I don't think we have that sort of revelatory access to an aspect of reality, of any aspect of reality, I think.
I still actually think we agree. We're just don't have the
I
semantic.
think we agree on a lot.
Oh,
I
don't
think we
say
agree on a
that.
lot, but we
Always-
must.
You don't want us to
disagree
agree?
on some
Okay, I disagree.
every time we have a guest
shoot,
on, I
hold
think
on, I
you're going to
lost
agree
an
with me,
earbud.
and then Keith ends up saying, "Oh no, you agree with me actually." I think we do.
I think we do disagree.
say
And
it.
Okay.
I'm
But
not sure I can articulate it better.
should we? I'm wondering whether we should skip free will in the cell.
We brought those in a bit. We brought those in into
We did.
Yeah.
I mean,
maybe free will. We should talk a bit about that perhaps, because we haven't talked that with the self has come in quite a bit.
yes, that's what I was going to say. We talked more about
You
the
wanna-
self and less about free will.
Do you want to just raise free will, and then I've got some questions for Annika off Twitter as well. So do you want to ask a question about free will, Keith, and then
Yeah, I mean, I you see now free will. You see, I think your perspective on free will is like you think free will is a sort of illusion. So you take a view, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very careful to distinguish between what I call free will and conscious will, because I think free will is a process in nature, decision making is a process in nature that exists, and we can talk about it. And there's a lot there to be talked about. We can, talk about how much freedom there is in any system, and, how permeable it is to its environment, and how, there may be 20 different ways it can react to one stimulus, and, talking about plant behaviors, incredibly interesting. And I just interviewed the author of a new book that you would both find fascinating, and you should read, and all of your audience should read too. It is called The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlanger. It's the newest. It's the newest plant behavior research. Most of it I hadn't even heard of. Studies from 2023, the most recent stuff. But anyway, there's a study that's not that new, but I think it was a pea seedling, and it's in one of those Y. What do they call it? Like a Y vessel. So the roots can grow in either direction, and they play the sound of running water at one end and not at the other, and the roots grow toward, so there are many cues from the environment in many different plants where they have to make decisions about which is the best path for them, which is where the light's coming from, whether to warn their fellow sagebrush that there's a predator nearby, the caterpillars are coming, whatever it is, right? It's very hard to predict exactly what any particular plant will do in any circumstance, because it's an incredibly complex set of processes that are taking place. I think there's a way in which we can view those processes as having freedom.
Yep.
I would say that when it comes down to it, there's no real freedom in there. And the thing that's an illusion, that I think that illusion we have, is not that we're not making decisions and there are all these complex processes taking place, but that the feeling is that there's a self that is, I think most people equate with consciousness. Their consciousness is their self, and that is the thing that ultimately has this ultimate freedom. And I fall victim to this as well. So, I have a feeling right now that, like, I don't know how to do it, but I could leave my body. That, like, this is my body, and I'm in here somewhere, and there's a me, and that me, I'm making free decisions all the time. And so I think, our brains are a much more complex version of the pea deciding which way to send their roots. And so it's all a process in nature that's unfolding. I don't think you can ever reverse the tape and play it differently. And so I don't think there's real freedom to be found there. But of course, there are these, interesting, complex decision-making processes that, from some angle, we could, watch the whole thing play out and know exactly how it would play out. But I don't know that there's any point in the universe that has access to all that information. Yeah.
I think it's absolutely. I mean, having disagreed with you over the previous thing, I'm fully on board with this. I think one way to do it is to sort of think about free will with a capital
Yes.
W, something that could really intervene in the world from outside.
Right. We feel we have that, and that's an illusion.
Exactly. But free will with a small f, small big thing. And I kind of want, of course, some people looking here a bit, do take free will in that strong metaphysical sense, seriously and think
Yes.
that even that
Most
might
people.
extend down to, and some people even have panagentialism views, looking at Philip here, which says that even atoms might have a sort of free will of that.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely with you on that. And I kind of just want to do the same thing for consciousness. Instead of consciousness being something that's outside the public world and somehow mysteriously
But
associated
that's what I'm trying to
with it.
convince you of. That's why I think we agree. We feel like we're trying to convince each other of the same thing. There's something interesting going on.
But what I think that, well, but what's the difference is I think that I think that what it is in the public world is just an evolved mechanism of
Right. Well,
sensitivity.
yeah. That's where we're going to go in
experience is.
circles again, but I think there's no reason
Yeah,
to believe it.
but it's a similar move, though, I think, because it's interesting that you make that move for free will, and I think
Yeah.
probably for the self. You're prepared to, not the big self, but maybe some sort of small self to do
Yeah,
it.
no, I mean, you think I'm committing myself to dualism, and I think you're committing yourself to dualism. But I actually think I think we probably agree, and it's very hard to communicate the perspective from which we're coming to the same conclusion.
It's interesting. I certainly everything you said about free will, having been
Yeah.
grumpy and disagree with you about, I think everything you said about
Yeah.
free will, right from the P and everything, I was
Yeah.
just absolutely.
Great, I love it.
And so, yeah.
No, it's all that
I don't
argument.
know if
It's
Philip
that
was on
argument
that.
that leads me to believe that consciousness is fundamental, believe it or not.
But that,
So,
doesn't lead you to believe that free will is fundamental, and the analogy would
No,
anyway,
there is no
Philip
free
does
will.
do that.
It's just
Philip-
processes playing out in nature, and underneath it, all those processes are at bottom. What they are is felt experience.
Yeah, that's a bit I don't go with. Anyway,
I know.
Philip on free will.
One day.
I mean, I think Annika and I have had this argument before. Well, I wonder, Annika, actually, how, to the extent that you're skeptical of capital F free will and capital
Yeah.
W, I guess, as well,
Yeah.
is that based on, to what extent is that based on meditation, or to what extent is that based on neuroscience, to what extent is that based on
They all converge.
philosophical
They
argument?
all
So,
arrows
the
point
thing-
in the same direction.
I'm
Meditation is, I mean, this will be a very interesting exercise for you, because it becomes viscerally clear that the free will, the capital free will that we feel we have, it is a tool by which you can break through that, and it really is like exposing any other illusion where you realize my experience is not what I thought it was.
But
Because
I mean, there are
Yeah.
Buddhist monks who have, meditated for many decades, who do still believe in free will. I mean, it's not
You'd
like
have
the
to be
entire Buddhist-
specific. I mean, it depends on what they may be talking about. Lowercase free will. They may be talking about other beliefs that I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, there are definitely, Buddhism. Meditation is usually seated in a religion of some sort or another, and I would say that Buddhism is more philosophy than a religion, but there are also some beliefs about things that I would definitely not agree on, and I wouldn't say that meditation is a window onto complete understanding of the universe. You can still believe in forces of gods and reincarnation and souls, and there's a lot there that I wouldn't agree with, but I think those people do have a realization, the type of realization I'm talking about. And it doesn't stop you from talking about free will in many other forms, but the one we walk around with the feeling that there is a total freedom, in a sense, at some point to go one way or another that stands outside of the physical world, I think is just the pure illusion. And you see it
So
when
I-
you're watching your moment-to-moment experience. You feel that you just see things happening. Everything happens. A desire comes into being, a belief comes into being, a thought comes into being, a sound comes into being. There is, from the perspective of conscious awareness, the thoughts arise in the same way that the sounds arise. There is no
wonder whether
you
it-
in control of all that.
I wonder whether, though, it could be a little bit like the, you think the light's always on in the refrigerator because it's on when you open it. So, I mean, I take it that if there is such a thing as free will with a capital F, it's going to be exhibited in moral dilemmas or when you're really deliberating on something. It's not going to occur when you're meditating on your experience. And
You
so
can,
maybe
you
it's
can
just
have moral
when you're
insights and
meditating,
big decisions about your life while you're meditating.
Right.
You can watch your mind make a decision.
right? Whilst
You
in
can
the
be
room.
aware. Yeah.
But maybe
I'm with you on
maybe when you
There's
when
no
you do
you
that-
making that. You're not behind the brain, like cranking the brain, churning out the decisions. They just happen.
Well, here's a hypothesis that when you do attend to your experience, that is somewhat incompatible with capital F free will, right? It's those very moments where you're reflectively attending to your experience that you're not going to be.
I can
making capital
experience
F
the
free.
illusion of free will while I'm meditating.
Right. So
I can
okay,
watch the process can be experienced, but I just see I have different beliefs at the other side of that process.
so it's
about what
difficult.
just
It's
happened.
obviously it's difficult to debate, what comes up in meditation, and I am
no,
somewhat.
we don't have to.
I'm-
Forget about
yeah.
that. It's
I-
more
but
just like where you. It's more just the philosophy of it.
Yeah.
When
So
you
coming
make
to
a
that, I mean,
decision, what is happening?
so coming to the, I am somewhat agnostic about capital F free will.
Okay.
What I am not convinced by is specifically the philosophical arguments against capital F free will. So a lot of people say, well, if our decisions had no prior causes, then they'd just be kind of random, arbitrary, meaningless. It'd be like the
they have
random
prior
decay
causes.
of a radio. Yeah, but for capital F free will people, they don't, right? That's the essence.
I see what you're saying. When they
Yeah.
believe that, yes.
So this is a way of in which people reject capital F free will. What philosophers call libertarian free will, as you know, Annika. That if they didn't have prior causes, our decisions, then it would just be kind of random, arbitrary, like the random decay of a radioactive isotope. But I like the response. Philosopher Jonathan Lowe, who was influential in academic philosophy, not very well known outside of academic philosophy, spent his career at my university, Durham. But his point was, well, look, even if they lack prior causes, there's an important difference between a free decision and some random
Yeah.
event,
I mean-
namely that their decisions are responses to considerations of value, right? So suppose you're, and let's just take an example of a moral dilemma. I always give examples of cheating on your partner, but I'm starting to worry my wife's going to get suspicious. So let me think of another moral dilemma, right? I'm
Stealing.
coming home from work, and I promised I'll get home to look after the kids, but it's a hot day and I'm passing the pub and I'm really craving a beer, right? And I'm wrestling with this decision. Do I keep my promise to my partner to come home and look after the kids, or do I give in to this great desire? Now there are, to my mind, so there are two considerations here.
Sure.
There's a felt yearning, and then there's a judgment about what I ought to do.
Yeah.
Let's pretend for this, if there is capital F free will, even if the decision has no prior cause, in making that decision, I will be responding to one of those two considerations.
Sure.
And that makes it very different to some random event like a quantum mechanical probabilistic randomness.
No, these are complex systems in nature. I mean, and I would actually describe the situation you just laid out. I think rather than seeing it as a free decision, it's a very complex decision-making process. So I would say it's a much more complex version of the P, deciding which way the roots should go, right? Rather than just, there's water on one side and there isn't on the other. Then of course, what the P's values and interests are, it's going to go toward the water. But maybe there's, maybe if it had information that there's an endless supply of water here, and there's no water here, but in 5 minutes there will be water here, or they have to deal with some short-term root drowning but will event, you know, and there are things. I'm making up this example, but there are more complex decisions like this, just at the level of plants, where it's not just, oh, there's water there, there's not there, so I'm going to go that way. There are many variables, and with human beings, I mean, the brain is the most complex thing in the universe that we know of, and so the variables are they're just vast, and it's impossible to keep track of all of them. But what is happening in the situation you just described is your brain is going like, should I? I'm in a Y. The roots are going to go that way. They're going to go that way, and you're not just processing the immediate gratification. You're processing the larger picture, and that's something brains are set up to do. And it's just a complex decision process that is playing out in nature. And
But now you're assuming no capital F free will. I'm trying to reject the philosophical argument that capital F free will is incoherent, and that argument's supposed to go.
I think it is incoherent.
I know, but let's.
Oh, am I not supposed to argue with you? I'm confused. What's my role?
So look, here's the argument. So what's wrong with this response, right? Is this the argument? Is this the argument you go for, right? Either it's got a prior cause or it's just random, right? And I'm suggesting, no, there's a middle way here. It's got no prior cause, but it's not random because it involves responding
What has
to
no
value.
prior cause? Doesn't everything have a prior cause? You don't think it does?
Well, not for the I don't know. I'm agnostic, but for the person who believes in capital F free will, the certain moments of decision, right, lack of prior cause. Well, let me put it this way: what's the argument that's incoherent?
I mean, I think
Right.
doesn't someone who has a belief in capital F free will think there doesn't have to be a prior cause? Aren't they getting rid of the prior cause?
Yeah. So what's
Yeah.
what's incoherent? What's wrong? What's incoherent about capital F free will?
I don't know that we live in a universe that doesn't have prior causes.
So it's
I believe we live in a universe, a cause and effect universe, at least in terms of how, you know, there may be a perspective from which you can stand where it looks more like a block universe, but as long as we're having an experience of moving through time, one thing happens, another thing happens, and there's nothing that I'm aware of. I've never seen evidence for something coming in from outside the universe and doing whatever it wants and not having an effect on something that doesn't want it to be affected, that doesn't want to be affected by that thing. I mean, it's a nonsensical, it's not, I mentioned this, I forget, I think it's in my book actually. Joseph Goldstein, the same meditation teacher, I asked him about his view on free will, and he said it occurred to him once that he likes to sometimes get his mind around how he answers something by first defining the thing that's being asked about. So he thought, okay, how would I define free will? And he found he couldn't define it. How do you define it? What does it mean? There is a will. There's something that exists in the world that is uncoupled from everything else. Is that what free will is? What is free will? I can't even come up with an it's an illusion we experience. It's not a real thing.
That's very much what I'm trying to say about consciousness in the strong sense.
Right,
Very
I
much.
know.
But it's just decoupled from everything.
Okay.
You see, you're
If
so
you
wrong.
follow me long enough,
Annika,
you'll believe that everything is conscious.
Annika, you're so right about free will, and Philip is so wrong, but I can't believe you agree with him on any of the other stuff, because you're so right about free will.
I guess just try one more time and then I'll try. I don't see what's
This argument about free
incoherent.
will get you, if you follow it long enough, will get you down the path of realizing that felt experience makes no sense as something that arises out of non-conscious matter.
I don't believe it does.
I know.
Right, can I ask one more thing?
You think it does? No? Oh no, because you don't think it's a thing. You don't think it's a thing.
I don't think it's a thing. I think it's a kind of constant.
Even though you
theoretical
believe that
concept.
the experiences exist in the universe,
I believe that whatever's
it's still not a
happening.
thing.
I believe that there are occasions when I'm in pain and something's happening there, but I think we misconceptualize it as this kind of pure felt experience.
No, I don't think it's a pure felt experience. I think it's related to
There's a mysterious,
but
private.
but it is felt.
These are descriptions we give. And they
You
just
can have a system that has something felt and something that doesn't.
It depends what you mean by felt. If felt means something that presents a hard problem, then I don't think anything exists that presents a hard problem. Put it like that.
Exactly. So then everything must be felt.
or everything must, or maybe nothing is felt
I
in
mean,
that sense.
nothing is felt except that.
In that sense, but that doesn't mean that the pain isn't real. It just means that pain, we misconceptualize it as felt in a way that is wrong.
The
Just as we
only thing
misconceptualize
that I
it.
can know about pain is the feeling of it. All my other beliefs
No.
about it could be wrong.
No, I totally. I think
You
exactly
take the opposite. I know, you've come to the
Almost
opposite
exactly the
conclusion.
opposite.
We have all the same arguments running all the way up until the very last step, and then we.
That's what's frustrating me, because we have so much agreement.
I'm telling you, we
But
agree
somehow
about
there's-
everything. We just,
there's
for some
some-
reason,
but
are
there's
drawing
some
the
point.
opposite conclusion.
In a way, I think
We're like
we're-
Democrats and Republicans who get so extreme they all develop the same beliefs.
No, 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 no,
guys,
no, no,
I guess
no,
I don't like that comparison.
like
Never
that
mind.
comparison.
Let's cut that out.
So,
Who's the Democrat?
I'm really intrigued by this, actually.
I am too.
Anyway,
I always
it's
have
more
been
about
as
free will.
I followed your work, and of course, you know, there's part of me that
I-
thinks
I
one
must
day
believe-
I'll get you on board, because we believe everything up until the last moment, and then
Oh, I'll get you
you
on board.
think your therefore is therefore there is no consciousness, and my therefore is therefore everything is consciousness. It's just the very last step we take is
That
different.
may come round like the horseshoe to
Yeah, because I don't think we disagree about anything else. Yeah.
Right, we have some questions that have been sent in.
Ah, okay.
Can I ask one more thing, Annika? And
Yeah.
just going back to what we were talking about a long time ago, about this idea that
4 hours ago.
the unity of experience at a given moment is an illusion. Just made me think of a lot of philosophers going back to Bertrand Russell and
Yeah.
G. Moore talked about the unity of the proposition, and what they meant by that's a rather technical way of saying, you know, thought seems to be something essentially unified. Like if I think Emma loves me, my wife's called Emma loves me, right? It's like you can't just get at that with like thinking Emma and loves and me. They've got to sort of come together, or they
No,
don't
they
have the
to be
meaning they do.
continually
So-
strung across time through memory. It's not something that happens in a split second. It is taking place over time. That's why I like Sarah's description of structures in time. Without memory connecting all the qualia together, yes, but there's no single moment where it's all happening at once. It's a process taking place over time.
Do you know, actually, talking of agreeing with Keith, this is reminding me a little bit of an aspect of Daniel Dennett, actually, Keith. What do you think, where he says, you know, there's no moment, it all comes together. It's
Right.
yes.
It's an ongoing process. And that's part of the illusion of self, is that we think we're these concrete things when we're processes. So.
What was Dennett's term for this, Keith? The internal
multiple drafts, do you
second,
mean? Or
second
the
transduction, the second transduction.
There's no second transduction.
There's no second. Yeah, that's what I
no
mean.
second transduction. No, there's just spiking patterns. There's no transduction back into some phenomenal medium for witnessing by myself.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm
sure
going to go
Annika
away.
Yeah.
I'm going to go away and do a 10-day meditation retreat,
Oh.
and then we can come back.
Is this a public commitment?
No, well, it's
Because I can
not
arrange
gonna be for a
that.
while. It's not going to be for a while, given I've got you.
That's fine, I
I'll say to
understand.
my wife.
Yeah.
I'll say to my
You
wife.
meditate
I'm just
with
going
the,
away for 10
Your
days
kids
to
are
meditate.
little. Yeah.
But maybe we can. Okay, so let's. If you have
No,
a
when
few
your
more
kids are old
minutes.
enough, when your kids are old enough, you get a babysitter, or grandma stays with the kids, and the two of you go together. Sam and I have gone together. It's a sweet thing to go together.
I would like to do that at some
my
point. I'm not
solution.
sure it's first priority, but yeah.
No, you have to raise your kids
yeah.
first.
No, I mean if we do get a chance for a holiday,
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you just saw.
I'd
you
rather,
saw
I'd
a
rather,
window
I'd
for
rather
10
chill
days
out.
alone with your wife and going on a retreat is not. Get it?
Maybe the second time. Okay, we got a few quick questions. You got time for a few quick questions
Yes.
from gathered on Twitter? We've got a question here from Sruli Bruka. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct. Can there be a new social contract or secular covenant between atheists and followers of faiths based on panpsychism and mutual lane keeping? I guess the idea is,
Bridge between-
could panpsychism be a way of bringing atheists and religious people together? in a common framework. That's, ending that bias.
Yeah,
I think is
this person is probably not going to like my answer, but I mean, maybe in a sense. I think, first of all, I don't like the category of atheism. I don't think it's a category of anything, really. It's not a belief system. There are lots of things I don't think are true, and if I read the Bible and the Quran and the holy books that I've read don't seem to me like a creator of the universe wrote them, and many of the things written in them are just flat out wrong. We know to be false. I mean, and so I just, I don't label myself an atheist. I don't think of myself as an atheist. I think of myself as a very spiritual person who is curious and looking for answers to what this universe is, what our role is, what, I'm curious about where we are. And the best and most interesting answers that have come so far have come through science. There is some beautiful wisdom that to be found in many books. Some of them are religious texts. People learn a lot about how to live in communities and treat each other well and live lives that are focused on well-being, and a lot of that comes out of some of the religious traditions. I don't think you need to believe anything about the nature of the universe to accept those teachings of wisdom. I think if panpsychism if it turns out that consciousness, I won't even use panpsychism. I guess it's a little bit, my allergy to religion is a little bit part of the reason I have a hard time with panpsychism too. I think we're at a point in human history where I think it really makes legitimate scientific sense to ask, does consciousness go deeper than we have previously assumed? And if it is in fact fundamental, part of the structure of the universe, I think that lends itself to a lot of psychologically healthy ways of viewing things. And so I think to whatever extent we think of religion doing that, it can do that for us, I think. But I also think maybe it's a way forward, right? It's a way, if you're a religious person who's open to something like consciousness is fundamental, it seems like you're open to a lot of the things in your religious text maybe not being totally accurate. So I think it's about moving forward. And so if you're someone who doesn't fall under any, doesn't believe in any religions that have been offered so far, but you think consciousness might be fundamental, and you're a religious person who thinks that might, then it's nice to have something that is a bridge, an area of content that is basically a new way to look at how the universe works. I'll also say that, generally, I think something that we don't keep in view enough across disciplines is how young we are as a species, and that we have this incredible, beautiful ability to understand a little bit more and to fight our evolutionary pressures and get a bit of an outside view, which, as far as we know, other intelligent beings have not been able to do. And we're at the very, very beginning stages of that. I mean, I think we barely understand the universe that we live in. And if you just look at, scientific progress, and many people make these points, but from the time we thought the Earth was flat and we had no idea that there were bacteria or that there were other planets or other, all of this is, and I think even in terms of human well-being and psychology and living in peaceful cultures, I think across every discipline and everything we're interested in, the more we recognize we are capable of making progress, we are capable of better and deeper understanding, and maybe there's no end to that, but we're certainly at the beginning of it. And so I think I like to approach all of this as we barely understand anything, and let's try to understand more. And so I hope that, some version of being curious about consciousness and whether we've been wrong about it and whether it's something that's more fundamental, is something that brings people together and focuses us on kind of moving forward with what does that mean about the universe if that's true.
Amen to that. One more question from an anti-panpsychist position, a question that comes up a lot from Tom Clark here. Is there any observational evidence for panpsychism? And if not, should that disqualify it as a research program in explaining consciousness? What do you think, Annika?
Yeah, no, I think about this a lot, and I wrote a piece called "The Strong Assumption" that is essentially an answer to this. That's on my website if anyone wants to look at it. I don't think there's actually any, when it comes down to it, there's any observational evidence for either side, and so I think we're making an assumption in either case. I think we are making an assumption that consciousness arises out of complex processing in brains, and we don't actually have any evidence for that. And no, it's impossible right now. I think there's a way in which we might envision the future of science where we could get a little more clarity on this. I think it may be something human beings will never have the answer to, but I think either way it's an assumption. And so far we've spent many decades in the sciences going with the assumption that consciousness emerges at some point in nature, and I think it's an equally valid assumption to assume it was there from the beginning. And I think it's time to make some scientific investigations into the possibility that that's the way the universe is structured. So I didn't give as thorough an answer as I should have, but I did write about it, so we can,
That's great. We should put that in the notes for the video. Well, thanks so much, Annika. I think it's been a vigorous discussion, some agreement, some disagreement. Hopefully the audience is clearer on where the debate lies.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, and Keith, I've been wanting to meet you for a long time. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to agree and disagree with you.
I want to talk to you more because what you said at the end there, I think this dismantling of the dualism is so important. And in a way, one thing that we're both doing is trying to dismantle it. I mean, you can put it everywhere, or you could say this stuff is nowhere. Yes. But you need to get rid of the idea that it's just special to us.
Yes.
So
we're very funny. We agree on everything, except that the last leap we make is you go that way and I go this way.
Don't let him corrupt you. Don't let him corrupt you. Seductive ideas.
One day I'll convince him. I'm committed.
I look forward to it.
Or if he convinces me, that will be great too. You know.
Maybe we'll meet halfway.
Okay.
Oh, thanks a lot, Annika. Thanks for being so generous with your time.
Have you? We going to put a link to Annika's book? Wait.
Oh. And and your series. When is your series?
Very well.
I'll just say my series will be coming out probably in 2 to 3 months. I don't yet have a date, but I am always putting updates on my website and on social media, so it will be announced the moment I know.
Fantastic.
You can follow that. Look out for it. Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Annika. Have a lovely day.
It's good to see you. You
Thank
too.
you.
Wow, that was fun. That was we've never sort of done Mind Chat like that before, where basically I hosted half of it and then you hosted half of it, and it sort of organically went like that. That's not really how we planned it, but yeah, I thought that worked quite well.
I like to not. I think planning too much is perhaps a bad idea, because we want to let the discussion. The idea is we're having a chat.
Yeah.
And it's
Blues in the name.
The viewers are listening in to us just chatting and following the conversation where it goes. And I think if you make it too structured, you lose that. You lose the spontaneity. And I think that's what makes it second. Anyway, that's my opinion. Well, now, you've messed up the outro the last few occasions, haven't you?
Have I?
Yeah.
I don't know. I always
this time, I will do it. Do it properly, okay?
Oh, I don't like change.
I thought this is what you wanted me to do. Annika thinks that that there's a certain kind of consciousness that is everywhere. I think that the kind of consciousness that you and Annika believe in is nowhere. But we can all agree that consciousness is wherever it is, and...
What's the bit you say?
Goodness sake.
Sorry. I've never done it this way around. I've never done this
on this script.
Hold on, I know it. And nowhere else.
El presidente de El Salvador, Nayib.
Man, look at this shit, bro. I know I ain't tripping, but look, he can flash me with his brights right here.
Today we're going to begin a voyage of discovery of this most extraordinary 3 pounds of jelly-like material found within each of our skulls. Now, neuroscience, as many of you know, is a discipline that employs the tools and language of anatomy, biochemistry, physiology, pharmacology, molecular biology, genetics, neurology, and psychiatry to understand the normal and pathological functioning of the nervous system. It represents a rather unique position in the curricula of the biomedical sciences in that it addresses an organ of obvious importance, the brain. What organ could be more important? But neuroscience also addresses more philosophical questions like the physiological basis of mind or emotions and our interactions with the world in which we live. It's been said that neuroscience is one of the last disciplines of the biological sciences. So when we know everything there is to know about the heart and the lungs and the kidneys, we'll still just be scratching the surface in understanding the brain. Now, this is not hopefully because people doing brain research don't have any, but rather it's because the brain is extraordinarily complex. For one, it contains more than 100 billion neurons, so that's a lot of neurons. But it's just not the number of neurons. Other organs, like the liver, have billions of liver cells. What makes the difference between the brain and the liver? 2 things. One is that unlike the liver, where most of the cells are doing the same thing, neurons in the brain all have specific jobs or functions. So neurons in the occipital cortex are involved in the processing of visual information. neurons in the temporal lobe involved in memory function, neurons in the frontal lobe involved in planning, neurons in the cerebellum involved in balance and locomotion, neurons in the brainstem involved in control of respiration. So it's almost as though the brain is not a single organ. It's hundreds of different organs, each carrying out their own specific function. The other major difference between the liver and the brain is that unlike the liver, where most of the cells are doing their own thing and working in isolation, in the brain, neurons are highly connected to each other. So it's been estimated that any one neuron can receive up to 10,000 connections or messages from other neurons, and it in turn can make 10,000 connections to other neurons. So there's a whole lot of talking going on. We used to think of the brain like a computer, but it's more like a computer network, with each one of those neurons being one of the individual computers. So it's those circuits that are formed by the connections among neurons that give rise to love, to charity, to Beethoven, to Shakespeare, to travel to the moon and beyond, to theories of relativity. But those circuits also give rise to hate and the ability to commit mass murder. And also, because there are so many components of the brain, there's so many things that can go wrong. Let me just introduce you to some of the things that can go wrong. And one of the things that you will be doing as future biomedical scientists and as clinicians is to know about the things that can go wrong and know about how to fix them. So here's just a brief summary of some of the major neurological disorders that we're going to talk about throughout the course. Alzheimer's disease, that's a big one that's become very prominent in the news because it's associated with loss of cognitive function and memory due to neuronal degeneration. So this is a so-called degenerative disorder, a degenerative neurological disorder, and in particular cholinergic neurons in the central nervous system. This accounts for a prevalence right now of 5.4 million individuals, and the number is growing on a yearly basis as the population ages. And this epilepsy, brain seizures due to uncontrolled recruitment of electrical activity in nerve cells, 3 million people. Huntington's disease, another neurodegenerative disease associated with abnormal voluntary movements due to the repeated mutation in the Huntington gene. Multiple sclerosis, an autoimmune disease, there's many of these, associated with sensory and motor losses due to demyelination. Myasthenia gravis, another autoimmune disease associated with muscular weakness due to loss of acetylcholine receptors at the neuromuscular junction. Parkinson's disease, a movement disorder due to degeneration of dopamine-containing neurons, another neurodegenerative disorder, in the substantia nigral basal ganglion pathway, a brain circuit. Schizophrenia, delusions and hallucinations believed to be due to imbalances in dopamine and glutamate neurotransmitter systems. Stroke, loss of specific function due to occlusion of blood supply to specific brain regions, 4 million people. What's not indicated here, when you total these up, you have about 15 million people. What's not illustrated here is depression and anxiety, and you can add another 15 million to that. So when you add it all up, you have 10% of the population in the United States right now being afflicted with some brain disorder. Now, despite the great diversity of these disorders, there are a couple of general themes that emerge that are particularly important to pay attention to. One is there's the involvement of genes, like the mutation in the Huntington gene. There are disorders that affect neuronal properties, like myelin and synapses. There are disorders that affect neurotransmitter systems, like dopamine and acetylcholine and their receptors. And there are disorders that affect neural circuits. So the key here is that in order to understand the brain, how it functions, and how it malfunctions, you need to pay attention to the properties of individual neurons, the electrical, biochemical, and molecular properties of individual neurons, as well as the ways in which neurons are connected to each other to form neural circuits. And that's really what's going to be the focus of this course. And the focus of this first lecture, I'm going to give you an introduction to the basic properties of nerve cells and the basic properties of neural circuits. A good place to start is with the anatomy of a nerve cell, as shown in this illustration. So neurons are special in that they're polarized. Unlike a red blood cell, where you can't tell the top from the bottom, neurons have a distinct polarity, and they can be divided roughly into 4 domains, spatial domains, if you will. There is the cell body, or soma, and that's the region of the neuron where most of the general cell functions take place. Right? Then, extending from the soma are these tree or branch-like structures called the dendrites. It's on the dendrites where neurons receive connections, as I'll show you in a moment, from other neurons. The cell body gives rise to a long tubular structure known as the axon. It's over the axon where information, electrical activity, is propagated from one region of a nerve cell to more distant regions. That axon is in many cases covered by a thick insulating sheath known as myelin. You've heard about multiple sclerosis. That affects this, a disease that affects this myelin structure. The axon gives rise to small branches, and at the terminal region of those branches are these specialized structures called synapses. It's at the synapse where information transfer occurs between one neuron and another neuron. And the next slide illustrates one of those so-called postsynaptic neurons. So now you see 2 neurons. This is the beginning of the formation of a simple neural circuit. This is the beginning of the formation of a simple neural circuit. You have a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron, right? And this postsynaptic neuron gets activated as a result of the release of a transmitter substance from the presynaptic neuron. Now, just as this is a postsynaptic neuron to this presynaptic neuron is a postsynaptic neuron to other neurons. So here you see 3 different neurons, nicely colored, red, blue, and green, that are making synaptic contacts on the dendrites of this neuron that we begin talking about. So here is a simple a 3-neuron circuit, a presynaptic neuron, a postsynaptic neuron, and another postsynaptic neuron. Now, the key in understanding how these circuits work is through this specialized structure called the synapse. And here is a blow-up view of the synapse showing some of the key morphological properties of synapses. So synapses are full with these specialized structures called synaptic vesicles. It's within the vesicles where the neurotransmitter substance is located. That neurotransmitter substance is packaged in the synaptic vesicle, and when an electrical signal invades the terminal, it causes the release of those synaptic vesicles, the content, into this space between the presynaptic and the postsynaptic neuron. So here are the little molecules of neurotransmitter substance. They diffuse across the space between the presynaptic and the postsynaptic neuron, and they bind to receptors on the postsynaptic side of the membrane, where they induce permeability changes that in turn leads to a new round of potential changes in the postsynaptic neuron. Okay, so that's the basic morphology of neurons and synapses. Now, an important part about the way in which the nervous system works is through electrical signaling. And here is a cartoon that illustrates how one can record the electrical signals that are present in nerve cells. So here is an idealized version of a nerve cell. And outside, so you see the cell body and the dendrites and the axon. Outside the neuron is a device called a microelectrode. This is nothing more than a piece of glass which is stretched under heat to produce a very fine tip. The tip can be less than a micron or so in diameter. The electrode is filled with a conducting solution and connected to some device that can monitor the electrical potential, like an oscilloscope. Now, when the electrode is in the outside of the extracellular medium, there's no potential recorded on the recording device because the extracellular medium is isopotential. But if one takes this electrode and carefully inserts the tip of the electrode so that the tip is now inside the cell, there is a sharp deflection on the recording device, so that now the recording device reads a potential of about minus 60 millivolts. That's 60 millivolts inside, negative with respect to the outside. This is the so-called resting potential. It's actually a characteristic feature of all cells in the body. All cells in the body, including nerve cells, have a potential difference between the outside and the inside of the cell, and that potential you'll learn much more about in this course and in physiology. It's called the resting potential. The resting potential, in the absence of any stimulation, is generally stable as long as the electrode remains in the cell and as long as there's no stimulation of the type we'll talk about in a moment. If you remove the electrode from the cell, the potential that's recorded goes back to zero. So this 60 millivolt level is the resting potential. There's nothing particularly special about minus 60. It's always about minus 60. It could be minus 65, it could be minus 55, minus 75. But the universal aspect of this is that the inside is negative with respect to the outside, and about 60 millivolts in potential. Okay, so this is the resting potential. Now, what distinguishes nerve cells and other excitable membranes like muscle cells from other cells in the body is that they not just have resting potentials, but they're also capable of changing their resting potential for the purpose of transmitting and propagating and processing information. So here is another simple cartoon. Here is an idealized nerve cell, and this cell has been impaled with one microelectrode to record the membrane. It's also been impaled with a second electrode, and this second electrode is connected up to a suitable stimulating source like a battery. And note the polarity of the battery here. The polarity of the battery is such that the positive pole is connected to this arrow, which is a switch. Now, when the switch is open, no current flows from the battery into the cell. But when the switch is closed, there will be a current flow from the battery into the cell, and what will be the consequences of closing the switch? Since the pole of the battery here is plus, it will make the inside of the cell more positive. So what we're going to see in this animation is a series of switch closures and openings, with each time a different size battery placed in the circuit. We're going to start with a small battery, and then we're going to go to a larger and larger battery, and look at the consequences of giving these greater and greater stimuli to the nerve cell. By the way, all these animations that I'm showing you are in your online electronics series. Okay, so there is a small battery, a bigger battery, a bigger battery. Note the battery gets bigger each time, larger and larger battery, and even a larger battery. And what's interesting here is you see as you change the size of the battery, you change the size of the current, and we make the inside of the cell more and more positive. And that's called a depolarization. Depolarization, it's more positive. And within a limit, the size of those depolarizations is roughly proportional to the size of the battery, until we reach a certain potential called the threshold, when a totally different type of signal is produced. And this signal is the so-called nerve action potential or impulse. So from this, you see a very important property of the action potential. You see that it's elicited in an all or none fashion. So stimuli below threshold fail to reach an action potential. Stimuli at, or in this case, above threshold, initiate an action potential. Now, the duration of the stimulus here was so short that only a single action potential could be elicited. But if we use a longer duration stimuli, we see that longer duration stimuli elicit a greater number of action potentials, with each action potential having the same all or nothing amplitude. So here's 4 panels, and what we're going to see in each one of these panels is a switch closure, and each panel is associated with a larger battery. So here's a very small battery, and here's a very big battery, right? You have different sized batteries, 1.5 volt battery, 9 volt battery, 12 volt battery, and so forth. So the larger the battery, the larger will be the depolarization of the nerve cell. So here's a small battery. And you can hear the sound of the electricity in the animation. So this is a small battery, and you see that it depolarized the cell, but threshold was not reached. You try a larger battery, a somewhat larger battery. Now we trigger an action potential, but just one action potential. Sorry about the sound, it's kind of morning. Okay. Here's a bigger battery. 2 action potentials, 3 action potentials, and here's an even bigger battery. A whole bunch of action potentials. The key point here is 2 very important points here. One is that the greater the magnitude of the stimulus, the greater is the number or frequency of action potentials. That's called frequency coding in the nervous system. And it's a very general phenomenon. The greater the intensity of a stimulus to the skin, the greater the number of action potentials that are propagated to the central nervous system, telling you about the intensity of a touch. The greater the stretch of a muscle, the greater the number of action potentials that are sent to the spinal cord. The greater the intensity of illumination to the eye, the greater the number of action potentials that will be sent to the central nervous system. And the same thing works, the same principle works on the motor side of the system. The greater the number of action potentials in a motor neuron, the greater will be the strength of muscular contraction. So this is called principle of frequency coding in the nervous system. You'll note when the stimulus intensity is larger, it's not that the size of the action potential changes. Each action potential has the identical size. It's rather that the number or frequency of action potentials changes. Okay, now, with that very brief introduction into the anatomy and physiology of nerve cells, we can start to talk about how nerve cells are connected to each other. And there's 2 basic flavors of the ways in which neurons talk to each other. There's a so-called excitatory connection, and there's a so-called inhibitory connection. So let's talk about the excitatory connection first, because it's the most obvious. So here's a cartoon of 2 neurons, a presynaptic neuron, this one nicely coded in green. We're going to call this an excitatory neuron for reasons that will become clear in a moment. And that neuron is making a synaptic contact with a postsynaptic neuron, this blue one. And we're making intracellular recordings, as shown below here, from both the postsynaptic neuron, that's the blue trace here, and the green excitatory neuron. Now, at this point in time, an action potential is initiated in the excitatory neuron. We don't have to worry for the moment how that was initiated, perhaps through a intracellular injection of current, or perhaps by some sensory stimulus. But what you see here, importantly, is the action potential in the presynaptic neuron, and the consequence of that action potential, there is a potential change in the postsynaptic neuron. And this potential is a depolarization. The membrane potential has become less negative. Such a potential is called an excitatory postsynaptic potential. Excitatory because it depolarizes the cell, bringing the cell towards threshold, and postsynaptic, for obvious reasons, it's a potential recorded on the postsynaptic side of the synapse. Now, in most cases, a single action potential in the presynaptic neuron, while it produces a depolarization of the postsynaptic neuron, that depolarization is insufficiently large to reach threshold and trigger an action potential in the postsynaptic neuron. But if 2 of those action potentials are fired in quick succession, the EPSP produced by the second action potential adds to the EPSP produced by the first action potential, and now that summated EPSP is capable of reaching threshold and firing an action potential in the postsynaptic neuron. So now, with this simple circuit, we have allowed one neuron to activate another neuron, and that's a go signal, if you will, in a very simplistic manner for propagating information through this circuit. Okay, let's talk about that other flavor of synaptic transmission. This is the inhibitory synaptic transmission. So at the top you see the same excitatory neuron that we talked about earlier. The bottom now shows this red neuron, which, for obvious reasons, we'll soon see is called an inhibitory neuron. Now, the first part of this panel is identical to what I showed you previously. An EPSP produced by the excitatory neuron by a single action potential produces a subthreshold EPSP. 2 together produces a summating EPSP, leading to an action potential. So here's the inhibitory interneuron. Now we produce an action potential in the inhibitory neuron, and what do you see in the postsynaptic cell is that the membrane potential becomes more hyperpolarized. more negative, which is called a hyperpolarization as opposed to a depolarization. So as a result of the chemical transmitter substance released here, the membrane potential of the postsynaptic cell becomes more negative. What's the functional consequence of that? Well, when you just look at this, you say, well, it doesn't do anything. The neuron wasn't firing any action potentials to begin with, and it's still not firing any action potentials because of the IPSP, inhibitory postsynaptic potential. This is called the EPSP, or excitatory postsynaptic potential. So what good are these IPSPs? Somebody is saying they reduce the probability of initiating an action potential. Absolutely correct. And you see that. You see that when you challenge the system with a combination of excitatory and inhibitory input. So the IPSP, it hyperpolarizes the cell, decreases the probability of the postsynaptic cell from firing. Now here is, you see, this process of integration. Here was the IPSP produced by the red neuron. Now you have another action potential in the red neuron producing the IPSP, but shortly thereafter you produce the same two action potentials in the excitatory neuron that you produced over here. Over here, these two action potentials produced EPSPs that summated to reach threshold and produce an action potential. Over here, the two EPSPs summate, but because of the simultaneous inhibition, now the summation fails to reach threshold, and the postsynaptic neuron does not fire an action potential. So this inhibitory neuron can regulate. It can regulate the ability of the excitatory neuron to drive the postsynaptic neuron. Or, as was said by one of the students, it can regulate the probability of the postsynaptic neuron being active. Okay, now let's talk about micro-network motifs. Fancy word, but all it means is that despite the tens of thousands of different ways neurons can connect with each other, there's a certain number of common motifs that occur very frequently in neural circuits used by the nervous system. And what I've illustrated here is some of those common motifs that we're going to be seeing over and over again throughout the course. Let me just give you a very brief introduction to them, and then we'll talk about some of them in more detail. So here is feed-forward excitation. We've already seen that. One neuron excites the postsynaptic neuron. Here is a circuit called feed-forward inhibition. In this diagram, by the way, the green cells are ones that have excitatory effects. The red cells have inhibitory effects. So this one's called feed-forward inhibition. An excitatory neuron activates this red neuron, and this red neuron, in turn, inhibits the neuron that it's connected to. It seems kind of odd, and we'll see how this actually works in a real circuit. And then there's this phenomenon of convergence and divergence. And it simply is a restatement of what I told you about the basic connectivity patterns. So here you see one postsynaptic neuron receiving connections from three different neurons. So these three different neurons are converging on the same postsynaptic neuron. So here is convergence, and here is divergence. One individual presynaptic neuron connects to many different postsynaptic neurons. Here's a circuit called lateral inhibition. An excitatory neuron connects or excites an inhibitory neuron, and that inhibitory neuron, in turn, it feeds back to inhibit adjacent neurons to the first one that was active. I'll show you more details of this in a moment. Here's an interesting circuit called feedback or recurrent inhibition. An excitatory neuron activates a postsynaptic neuron. The postsynaptic neuron activates an inhibitory neuron that makes an inhibitory connection onto the neuron that was first activated. Does anybody see a possible function for this, just thinking about it? It's kind of like a braking mechanism. This neuron gets active, the postsynaptic neuron gets active, the postsynaptic neuron feeds back and says, hold on, I don't want you to be active anymore, I had enough. So this is a braking mechanism. Once you start this thing going, it comes back and turns it off. Here's an interesting circuit, look at this one. An inhibitory neuron connects to an inhibitory neuron, which connects to another inhibitory neuron, which connects to another inhibitory interneuron, which connects back to itself. What could this possibly do? We'll see in a moment. And then there's, just like there's feedback or recurrent inhibition, there's feedback or recurrent excitation. And what do you think intuitively this kind of circuit can do? It's a switch. Once this neuron is active, the postsynaptic neuron is active, which then feeds back to activate the neuron that started it all. So once you get this thing going, it will go on and on forever, in principle. So this is a switch. And switches are really important in some cases in the nervous system, because you'd like to have some of your neurons switching on right now, the neurons that are involved in memory mechanisms, so you can remember this lecture tomorrow. So let's talk about some of these in more detail. Let's talk about the feed-forward excitation and feed-forward inhibition. And this is particularly relevant to what you just heard from Dr. Oakes. So here is the stretch reflex, the monosynaptic reflex that Dr. Oakes talked about, because it's called the monosynaptic reflex because it involves a single synapse in the spinal cord. It's actually a little more complicated, but basically it can be boiled down to that. So here's that neurologist hammer that Dr. Oakes talked about. The hammer taps the tendon, stretches the tendon, activates receptors, stretch receptors. Those stretch receptors initiate action potentials indicated by these little circles. The action potentials then propagate to the central nervous system, the spinal cord, where they produce a feed-forward excitatory connection onto this blue neuron. That neuron becomes active. Action potentials propagate out the ventral root that cause the contraction of the skeletal muscle, and here's the subsequent reflex. This would be a grade 2 reflex based on your chart. Simple monosynaptic reflex involving a feed-forward excitation circuit. Now, what you also see here is another interesting circuit motif that we talked about. Look at this neuron here, which is called an interneuron, this black one. Now, an interneuron is called an interneuron because it's interposed between one neuron and another neuron. So here, the interneuron is interposed between this blue sensory excitatory neuron and this red motor neuron, which happens to be a flexor motor neuron, right? Extensor motor neuron, flexor motor neuron. Note that with this reflex, we activate the extensor motor neuron. Isn't that what you want to do, to have the reflex? And this is, by the way, as was indicated, this is a simple way of assessing the integrity of the nervous system with this simple reflex test. Right? It tells us how well information is being propagated here. It tells us something about synaptic transmission. It tells us about the motor synapse here in the muscle cell. So one can glean a lot of information about the integrity of our nervous system just by using this simple reflex and others. Okay, the neuron, the presynaptic neuron here, the green one, excites the interneuron. The interneuron releases the neurotransmitter producing an IPSP in the flexor motor neuron. Why do you want to inhibit the flexor motor neuron? Because you want to get the extension, you want to decrease the probability of having this neuron being active and producing an inappropriate contraction, right? So this feed-forward inhibition is a way of regulating neural circuits. Let's talk about convergence and divergence using, again, the spinal circuit. So here is the very simplified version of the basic circuit. The sensory neuron connects to the extensor motor neuron. It also connects to the inhibitory interneuron, which in this case would inhibit the flexor motor neuron. It's more complicated than that, is that the sensory neuron just doesn't connect to one motor neuron, one extensor motor neuron. It connects to many different extensor motor neurons. So this is the principle of divergence. And here's the principle of convergence. Any one motor neuron doesn't just receive synaptic connections from a single sensory neuron, it receives synaptic connections from many different sensory neurons. So it's this combination of convergence and divergence that really makes this reflex work. It's not just that one synapse, it's a whole bunch of synapses. Okay, let's talk about lateral inhibition. Lateral inhibition is a very important circuit that mediates a phenomenon called edge enhancement. And what I mean by that is shown in this little panel here, showing two rectangles, a dark one and a lighter one next to each other. Now, if you look at this carefully, I can tell you in advance that the illumination here, the intensity of the illumination is totally uniform throughout, and the intensity for the darker rectangle, and it's totally uniform throughout for the lighter rectangle. But if you look closely at the border between these two rectangles, you may notice that at the border of the darker rectangle, it seems a little bit darker than the rest of the rectangle. And at the border of the light rectangle with the dark rectangle, it seems a little bit lighter here than it does throughout the rest of the rectangle. So this is does everybody see that? This is not a trick. This is totally the same illumination here and here. So this is edge enhancement. This allows us to detect edges, and that can be really important if you're walking at night near a cliff. You want to make sure you know where the edge is, right? So edge enhancement. Now, how does this work? This simple circuit of lateral inhibition allows us to make this distinction. And here's a very simple cartoon of how it works. So here's the dark rectangle, here's the light rectangle. Now, and here's a very simple description of the circuitry in the red. So we have light impinging on photoreceptors, and as a result of the light, the photoreceptors become active and initiate action potentials. Those photoreceptors in turn make synaptic connections to so-called second-order neurons, and those neurons then transmit information to the central nervous system, right? And the assumption here is, so these fives, 5, 5, 5, and 10, 10, 10, that's just a reflection of the intensity of illumination. Let's just say this is 5 lumens here, and the brighter structure is 10 lumens, right? So because you have 5 lumens, we're going to make a very simple assumption that an intensity of light of 5 lumens produces action potentials of 5 hertz, 5 per second, right? So 5 per second here, 5 per second here, 5 per second here, and the neurons that are activated by the brighter intensity stimulus through the retina then fire more action potentials. So 10 lumens, this great simplification, fire 10 action potentials per second. So if this was all there was to the circuit without lateral inhibition, what you would perceive is exactly what is presented to the eye. Right? This is dark and this is bright, and there's no difference at the edge. Now, with lateral inhibition, things change. So here's the lateral inhibition. Each one of these retinal receptors makes an inhibitory connection to adjacent downstream second-order neurons. The connection is weak, as indicated by this point 2. The normal excitatory connection is +1, the inhibitory connection is -2. So each one of these neurons makes an inhibitory connection to its neighbor. That's the lateral inhibition. Now, note the consequences of this. Over here, away from the edge, the 5 intensity of illumination now produces fewer action potentials because there's some inhibition from the neighbor, but it's still 3 here and 3 here, right? That's fine. And the neurons that are responding to the brighter illumination, they are still firing at a constant rate. It's somewhat reduced, 6 and 6. But the real interesting thing occurs here at the edge, because now the neuron that is receiving the illumination at the edge receives less inhibition from this neuron at the edge, and therefore its output is greater because it's getting less inhibition from its partner over here. And this neuron, which is responding to the dim illumination, is receiving more inhibition from its neighbor to the right in the bright region. So the net consequence is that the neuron that's responding here is firing less than its partners, and the neuron that's responding here is responding more, giving a perceived light difference at the edge. Think about this. It's not intuitively obvious, but if you work through the numbers, I think it will become clear. Now, lateral inhibition is great because it provides us with this edge enhancement. But it also has a problem, and it leads to a so-called visual illusion. And there's one very famous visual illusion called Mach bands. You've probably all seen this one. So here what we see is a gradient of illumination. See, it's bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, dark, bright, dark, right throughout. It's all up. And also what you see here is a horizontal stripe. And you'll note with this horizontal stripe that it appears to change in illumination. It's dark here, it's bright here, dark here, bright here. Does everybody see that? Well, you're all seeing an illusion because it's the exact intensity here as it is here. And you can see that by putting a mask over this. So you don't see this anymore, you just see the horizontal bar. Here we go, here's the mask. And there's no tricks here. There's the mask. It's the exact same intensity. So you've all been tricked. It shows that what you think you see is what sometimes is not really there. This is just a simple illusion. How does this work? So the property of lateral inhibition explains this. Why is this dark here? This region is perceived as being dark here because the neurons that are responding to this intensity in the retina have neighbors that are responding to a bright light. So they are inhibited by their neighbors. And why is this appear to be darker here? Because this region is dark, so these neurons are inhibiting the neurons responding to the band less so, right? So here is your visual illusion. And just as the lateral inhibition can explain edge enhancement, it can also explain this very ubiquitous visual illusion. Let's talk about feedback or recurrent inhibition. And before I talk about it in terms of a neural network or a micro network, I want to talk about it in terms of a so-called nano network. So there's 3 levels of networks that we're going to be talking about. Micro network, that's these types involving a small number of cells. A nano network involving biochemical reactions networks. And finally, macro networks that involve large connections or collections of micro networks. So a nano network of feedback inhibition is important for producing a phenomenon as shown here. Now, the standard textbook version of neurons is either they are silent or they fire action potentials when they are stimulated with a synaptic input. But some neurons, like this one, have a so-called endogenous bursting behavior. So in the absence of any input, this neuron is firing bursts of action potentials, becoming silent, firing bursts of action potentials again, and becoming silent. So this is called an endogenous bursting activity. These kinds of activity patterns could be important for rhythmic behavior, like respiration. How is it that we breathe in and out? This kind of neuron could be responsible for those kinds of rhythmic behaviors. How does this work? This works through a nano circuit. Here is an idealized version of that neuron, the outside of the cell, the inside of the cell. These cells have specialized channels that allow for calcium influx to occur. Calcium is a positively charged ion. It's at high concentration outside, low concentration inside. The feedback inhibition network, and we want to compare this network with this network. So the calcium comes in, and when calcium comes in, it depolarizes the cell. And as it depolarizes the cell, it brings the cell to threshold, causing the initiation of action potentials. But the interesting part here is that the increase in calcium also reduces the conductance of this channel to allow calcium inflow to occur, so the calcium inflow stops. But that calcium then, which is inhibiting the inflow of calcium, then is taken up by buffers, and so the calcium concentration is reduced, allowing the influx of calcium to occur again and repeating the cycle. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that this type of feedback inhibition circuit is capable of generating an oscillatory behavior. An oscillatory behavior in a neuron and an oscillatory behavior in a nerve circuit. This is a relatively short-lasting type of phenomena, short-term dynamics, once every 10 to 15 seconds. There is a subcellular network that's due to feedback inhibition that underlies 24-hour rhythms. And the big 24-hour rhythm that you all know about is the circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythms are due to oscillations produced in a special part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's located just above the optic nerve. And what the suprachiasmatic nucleus does is it generates rhythmic patterns of output. And those rhythmic patterns of output have widespread effects on the release of hormones from the pineal gland, melatonin, regulation of the autonomic nervous system, the daily cycle of our body temperature, regulation of hormonal relief. Now, it's interesting that this very complex and profound phenomenon can really be boiled down to a simple feedback inhibition circuit among one gene. So there's a gene called PER, and PER leads to the synthesis of the PER message, and in turn, the PER protein. PER protein then feeds back to inhibit the transcription of the gene. And this inhibitory cycle has a time course of about 24 hours. So the protein is made, it then inhibits the cycle, the protein is degraded, relieving the inhibition, allowing the cycle to happen again, making more protein, inhibiting the transcription, the protein is degraded, and the cycle repeats itself over and over again over a 24-hour period. Remember that crazy circuit with the 4 inhibitory neurons inhibiting each other? Well, that can explain, at least in principle, quadrupedal locomotion. So here's a little doggy showing the pattern of a walk. It's a gait, so-called gait, right? And a walk is associated with a movement of the left front limb, and quarter of a cycle later, the right hind limb, and then half cycle later, the right front, and then the left hind. So the question is, how can this kind of gait be produced by the nervous system? Can a simple circuit do it? Another secondary question is that animals can do more than just walk. As shown over here, they can also trot. A trot is a gait associated with in-phase movements of the left front and the right hind, and with 180 degrees out of phase of the opposite limbs. But they can also do something called a bound, where the 2 front limbs are in phase and 180 degrees out of phase with the rears. And then there's something like a gallop, which is very similar to a bound. So we don't understand the neural circuits that produce these, but let's think about ways in which, in principle, you could do it. There's all the dogs. You can get these animations online. So one way you could do it is as follows. Remember that endogenous bursting neuron? You could take 4 of those endogenous bursting neurons and have one neuron hook up to the left front limb, another hook up to the left hind limb, and so forth. And if you set up the the timing just right. So you put these two guys in phase with each other, and these guys, hind limbs 180 degrees out of phase with the first two, you could, in principle, produce a gallop. These two limbs would go first, and then would be followed half a cycle later by the hind limbs. Right? In theory, it would work, but in practice, there'd be problems because one is you'd have to set these up so they're exactly in phase, right, like this. And what would happen if there was some drift in the activity? So this one started firing a little bit earlier or later. Well, the problem would be that things would get very uncoordinated. So this doggy is not going to gallop. In fact, it's not even going to walk very well. So one way you could do this is with this circuit here. You take now 4 of these neurons, and each one becomes a bursting neuron. And when you do that, you get a circuit like this. And if you do a simple twist of the circuit, shown here, it's the same circuit. This blue one that was that green one down here is now up here. Now this circuit, with just those 4 neurons, with those endogenous bursting properties, can produce each of those 4 different gallops with slight modifications in the strength of the synaptic connections between the neurons. So here's an example where this relatively simple circuit can, at least in principle, produce a fairly complex behavior, which gives us hope for understanding the more complex behaviors in the nervous system. Here's a circuit I'm not going to go into. You can read about it. This is a circuit for the recurrent feedback excitation. This is important in the hippocampus. That's a region of the brain important in memory mechanisms where the memory is distributed among the strength of the synaptic connections. And then finally, we have macro circuits. All these different regions of the brain are highly interconnected to each other. And within each one of these regions are microcircuits, but this microcircuit is communicating with another microcircuit over here. And collectively, these circuits form something that looks like this. This is a macro circuit for the processing of visual information. You need to commit this to memory. No, I'm only joking. But just to illustrate the point of how complicated things are. So here, down here, processing of information from the retinal ganglion cells to the lateral geniculate up to various visual cortical areas. All these different cortical areas are communicating with each other through feed-forward and feedback connections. We've given you a brief introduction to the properties of neurons and neural circuits. What you're going to learn about next in the lecture from Dr. Beamng is how these circuits are formed. How do they form in development, and how is it possible that one neuron can be specifically wired and connected to its appropriate partner. Okay, thank you.